I stood in that marble bathroom, rubber gloves soaked with bleach and humiliation, staring at my reflection in the mirror above the toilet I'd just scrubbed for the third time this week. The woman looking back at me had tired eyes and graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing clothes that smelled like industrial cleaning products. But what shocked me most wasn't how I looked. It was the bank statement crumpled in my trembling hand, showing a balance that would change everything. A balance that proved my son and his wife had been stealing from me for months while treating me like their personal maid. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Joanne Carter, but everyone calls me Jo. I'm 58 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. I was the proud mother of Daniel Carter, my only child, who I'd raised as a single mother after his father walked out when Danny was just 3 years old. I was the woman who worked double shifts at Riverside Medical Center for 35 years, climbing from night janitor to head of facilities management. I was the grandmother who spoiled little Emma Carter rotten, and the mother-in-law who tried her best to welcome Sophia into our small family when she married my son 3 years ago. Most importantly, I thought I was the smart woman who had finally achieved financial security after decades of struggle. The woman who owned her modest 3-bedroom house outright, who had a healthy retirement account, and who had just received a substantial inheritance from my late Aunt Margaret's estate. The woman who was generous enough to help her son and daughter-in-law buy their dream home by co-signing their mortgage and providing the down payment they couldn't afford on their own. But standing in that pristine bathroom with its heated marble floors and gold-plated fixtures, holding evidence that would shatter my understanding of my own family, I realized I had no idea who Joanne Carter really was. Because the woman I thought I was would never have let herself become what I'd become, a live-in servant in a house I was paying for, cleaning toilets for people who saw me as nothing more than free labor and an open wallet. The bank statement was from an account I didn't even know existed, an account that bore my name and social security number but showed transactions I'd never authorized. Large transfers, monthly automatic payments, cash withdrawals that happened while I was scrubbing their floors and watching their daughter. My signature forged so perfectly it could have fooled me if I hadn't known I'd never signed those documents. As I smoothed out the wrinkled paper with my wet gloves, reading the numbers that represented months of systematic theft, I felt something inside me shift. The meek, grateful woman who had been bending over backwards to prove herself worthy of her son's love was disappearing. In her place, someone much stronger was emerging. Someone who remembered that she had built a life from nothing. Someone who had worked her way up from scrubbing hospital floors at midnight to managing million-dollar facility budgets. Someone who had raised a son alone and put herself through night school and saved every penny for decades. Someone who had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that she was nobody's victim. I carefully folded the bank statement and slipped it into my pocket, next to the house key they'd given me 6 months ago when they'd convinced me to move in temporarily to help with Emma while they got settled in their new home. The same house key I was about to use in ways they never could have imagined. The transformation had been so gradual, so expertly orchestrated, that I almost missed it happening entirely. When Daniel first introduced me to Sophia, she was everything I'd hoped for in a daughter-in-law. Warm, funny, seemingly devoted to my son, and wonderful with children. She worked as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup downtown, made excellent money, and appeared to be exactly the kind of stable, ambitious woman who could give Danny the life I'd always wanted him to have. Their courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Sophia would bring me flowers when they came for Sunday dinner, ask about my work at the hospital, and listen with genuine interest when I talked about my plans for retirement. She called me Mama Jo from almost the beginning, a nickname that made my heart swell with the kind of maternal pride I'd been waiting years to feel. Danny had dated plenty of women over the years, but none of them had ever made him light up the way Sophia did. At 32, my son had finally found someone who appreciated his dry sense of humor, his dedication to his work as a software engineer, and his quiet loyalty to family. When he told me they were getting engaged, I cried tears of pure joy. The wedding was beautiful. Intimate ceremony at Sophia's family's country club, with white roses and string quartets and everything elegant and perfect. I wore the navy blue dress Sophia had helped me pick out, felt proud and important as the mother of the groom, and danced with my son to Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World, while Sophia's family smiled approvingly from their white-draped tables. When they bought the house on Magnolia Avenue, the sprawling colonial with the wraparound porch and 3-car garage, I was thrilled for them. It was exactly the kind of home I'd dreamed of providing for Danny when he was little, exactly the kind of place where my future grandchildren could grow up with stability and beauty. The fact that they needed help with the down payment didn't concern me. Young couples always struggled with those initial costs, and I had the inheritance from Aunt Margaret sitting in my savings account, doing nothing but earning minimal interest. When Danny called me one evening, his voice nervous but hopeful, and asked if I might consider helping them with the purchase, I didn't hesitate. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask," he said, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was anxious. "But the house is perfect for starting a family, and the seller is motivated. If we could come up with the down payment, we could get it for under market value. How much do you need?" I asked, already mentally calculating how much I could afford to give them. $80,000, he said quietly. "I know it sounds like a fortune, but Mom, this house could be our forever home. Our kids could grow up there. You could have Sunday dinners in a real dining room instead of my tiny apartment." $80,000 was more than I'd ever spent on anything except my own house, but it was also less than half of what Aunt Margaret had left me. And the picture Danny painted, family dinners, grandchildren playing in a big backyard, holiday gatherings in a house that felt like a real home, was everything I'd ever wanted. "Let me talk to my financial advisor," I told him. "But Danny, if this is what you and Sophia want, if this is going to make you happy, then we'll figure it out." The relief in his voice was immediate and overwhelming. "Mom, I can't tell you what this means to us. I promise we'll pay you back. Every penny." "Don't worry about paying me back," I said, and I meant it. "This is an investment in your future, in our family's future." 2 weeks later, I sat in the mortgage company's office, signing papers to become a co-signer on their loan and writing a check that represented years of careful saving. Sophia held my hand as I signed, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Mama Jo, I don't know how we'll ever thank you," she whispered. "You're making our dreams come true." Walking out of that office, seeing the joy on their faces, feeling like I was finally able to give my son something truly meaningful, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. I had no idea I was signing my own financial death warrant. The changes started small, so small, I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. It began about a month after they'd moved into the house, when I came over for our usual Sunday dinner and found Sophia in the kitchen, looking frustrated and overwhelmed. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked, setting down the apple pie I'd brought and reaching for an apron. Sophia sighed dramatically, gesturing at the chaos around her. "I'm just so behind on everything. The house is huge, and with work being so demanding lately, I can't keep up. Daniel tries to help, but he works such long hours." I looked around the kitchen, which honestly didn't look that messy to me. A few dishes in the sink, some mail scattered on the counter, nothing that couldn't be handled in 20 minutes. But Sophia looked genuinely stressed. "Why don't I help?" I offered. "I could come over maybe one afternoon this week, help you get caught up." "Oh, Mama Jo, I couldn't ask you to do that," Sophia said, but her eyes lit up with hope. "You work so hard already." "I want to help," I insisted. "That's what families do for each other." And so it began. One afternoon turned into 2 afternoons. 2 afternoons became a regular weekly schedule. Within 2 months, I was coming over every Tuesday and Thursday after work, spending my evenings cleaning their house while they relaxed or worked late or went out with friends. At first, it felt good to be needed. Sophia would greet me with hugs and grateful smiles, always making sure to tell me how much my help meant to them. Daniel would thank me with genuine warmth, telling me stories about his coworkers, whose mothers-in-law were difficult and demanding, how lucky he felt to have a mom who actually wanted to help instead of criticize. "You're the best, Mom," he'd say, kissing my cheek before heading upstairs to change out of his work clothes. "I don't know what we'd do without you." The praise felt wonderful. After years of feeling like I was on the outside of Danny's life, watching him build his career and relationships while I worked nights and weekends, it was incredible to feel central to his happiness again, to feel needed and appreciated and loved. But somewhere around the 3-month mark, the gratitude started to feel more routine, more expected. Sophia stopped greeting me at the door with hugs. Instead, she'd call out from upstairs where she was taking a bath or watching television. "Thanks for coming, Mama Joe. The vacuum is in the hall closet." The list of tasks grew longer. What had started as light housekeeping became deep cleaning, washing windows, scrubbing baseboards, organizing closets. When I mentioned that I was getting tired, that maybe we could scale back to just the essential cleaning, Sophia's face would crumple with disappointment. "I'm so sorry we're such a burden," she'd say, her voice trembling slightly. "I know we're asking too much. It's just that we're both working so hard to afford this house, and I'm trying to get pregnant, and the stress is just overwhelming sometimes." The mention of pregnancy always stopped any complaints I might have had. The possibility of grandchildren, of continuing our family line, of having little ones to spoil and love, it was worth any amount of housework. "You're not a burden," I'd assure her quickly. "I'm happy to help. That's what grandmothers are for, right?" And Sophia would smile and hug me and tell me how blessed they were to have me, and I'd feel guilty for even thinking about complaining. The first time Sophia asked me to clean the bathrooms, I hesitated. There's something particularly demoralizing about scrubbing someone else's toilet, something that feels more like servitude than help. But when I started to suggest they hire a cleaning service for the bathrooms, Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "We're already stretched so thin financially," she said. "Between the mortgage and my student loans and trying to save for a baby, we just can't afford professional cleaners. But if it's too much to ask, I understand." Looking at her face, thinking about my son working long hours to afford this beautiful house, remembering how much they were depending on me, I felt selfish for even hesitating. "Of course I'll clean the bathrooms," I said. "What are families for?" By month 4, I was coming over 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. My entire social life revolved around cleaning their house. I'd canceled my book club membership because I didn't have time to read. I'd stopped going to my water aerobics classes because I was too tired after spending evenings scrubbing their floors.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
My coworkers at the hospital started commenting on how exhausted I looked. Janet from housekeeping pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay at home. "You seem stressed lately," she said, studying my face with the concern of someone who'd known me for 15 years. "And you've lost weight. Are you taking care of yourself?" I wanted to tell her the truth, that I was working 40 hours a week at the hospital, and then working another 20 hours cleaning my son's house. That I was spending my weekends doing their laundry and grocery shopping while they went out with friends or took weekend trips. That I was exhausted and resentful and couldn't figure out how to say no without feeling like a terrible mother. Instead, I smiled and told her I was fine, just busy helping Danny and Sophia get settled in their new home. "That's nice of you," Janet said, but her expression remained concerned. "Just make sure you're not giving so much that you forget to take care of yourself." Her words stayed with me, but I pushed the discomfort aside. This was temporary, I told myself. Once they got into a routine, once Sophia got pregnant and they were focused on preparing for a baby, they wouldn't need me as much. I just needed to be patient and supportive while they figured things out. The baby news came on a rainy Thursday in October. I was in their kitchen, wiping down cabinets after loading their dishwasher, when Sophia bounced in with a pregnancy test in her hand and tears of joy streaming down her face. "Mama Joe!" she squealed, throwing her arms around me. "We did it! I'm pregnant!" The joy I felt was immediate and overwhelming. After months of hoping and waiting, of listening to them talk about their plans for children, of imagining myself as a grandmother, it was finally happening. "Oh, sweetheart," I cried, hugging her tight. "This is the most wonderful news." Danny came home to find us crying happy tears in the kitchen, and the celebration that followed was everything I'd dreamed of. We called Sophia's parents, who screamed with excitement over the phone. We opened a bottle of sparkling cider and made toasts to the future. We spent the evening looking at baby websites and talking about nursery themes, and arguing good-naturedly about whether the baby would have Danny's dark eyes or Sophia's blue ones. That night, driving home to my own quiet house, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I was going to be a grandmother. All the cleaning and cooking and exhaustion of the past few months suddenly felt like a small price to pay for being part of this miracle. 2 weeks later, Sophia called me at work, her voice weak and shaky. "Mama Joe," she said, and I could tell she'd been crying. "I need to ask you something, but I don't know how." My heart immediately started racing. "What is it, honey? Is everything okay with the baby?" "The baby's fine," she said quickly. "It's just, the morning sickness is so much worse than I expected, and work is being really demanding right now. And Danny's been traveling more for his job. I'm just so overwhelmed." "What can I do to help?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "Would it be possible? I mean, I know it's a huge imposition, but would you consider staying here for a while? Just until I get through the worst of the first trimester?" The request caught me completely off guard. "Staying there?" "In the guest room," Sophia said quickly. "Just temporarily. Maybe a few weeks. Just until I feel more like myself. I could really use the help. And it would be so much easier if you were here instead of driving back and forth all the time." I thought about my own house, my own space, my own routines. Then I thought about Sophia, pregnant and struggling, needing support during this crucial time. I thought about my son, working hard to provide for his growing family, and my future grandchild, who deserved to have a healthy, happy mother. "Of course," I said. "Let me pack a bag tonight, and I'll come over after work tomorrow." "Really?" The relief in Sophia's voice was palpable. "Mama Joe, you're a lifesaver. I promise it's just temporary." That was 6 months ago. I'm still sleeping in their guest room, still cleaning their toilets, still doing their laundry and cooking their meals while they live their lives, as if having a live-in maid is perfectly normal. The morning sickness Sophia used to justify my moving in disappeared after the first trimester, just like the pregnancy book said it would. But somehow, my temporary stay became permanent without anyone ever discussing it. What's worse, I've slowly realized that my role in their lives has shifted from beloved family member to essential household staff. They don't ask me to clean anymore. They expect it. They don't thank me for cooking dinner. They complain if it's not ready when they get home from work. They don't appreciate my help with their bills and finances. They've started treating my bank account like it's their personal savings fund. The bank statement I found today, crumpled in Sophia's purse while I was looking for tissues to clean up a spill in her car, proves that my worst suspicions were correct. They've been systematically stealing from me for months, using my personal information to open accounts and take loans I never authorized. While I've been scrubbing their floors and washing their clothes, they've been robbing me blind. But what they don't know is that the woman they've been taking advantage of isn't the same woman who raised their son alone and built a life from nothing. She's someone much more dangerous than that. She's someone who knows how to fight back. And tomorrow, they're going to discover exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness and generosity for stupidity. Tomorrow, they're going to learn that you should never, ever steal from a woman who has nothing left to lose. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came on a Tuesday morning in February, when I opened my laptop to pay my own bills and discovered my checking account was $3,000 lower than it should have been. I stared at the screen for a full minute, certain I'd made a mistake. I scrolled through the transaction history twice, checking and rechecking the numbers. But there it was in black and white, an electronic transfer to something called Carter Family Trust that I'd never heard of. My hands were shaking as I called the bank's customer service line, waiting through what felt like hours of hold music before finally reaching a representative named Michelle, who spoke in the careful, professional tone reserved for potentially hysterical customers. "Mrs. Carter, I show that transfer was authorized with your electronic signature on January 15th, Michelle explained. The funds went to an account at First National Bank under the Carter Family Trust. Do you not remember making this transfer?" I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. I never authorized any transfer. I don't even know what the Carter family trust is. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but our records show this was processed with all the correct authorization codes. Your social security number, your mother's maiden name, all the security information matched perfectly. The room started spinning slightly. How could someone have all my personal information? How could they forge my electronic signature so perfectly that the bank couldn't tell the difference? And more importantly, who would do this to me? I need to file a fraud report, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Someone has stolen my identity and taken money from my account. Of course, Mrs. Carter. I'll transfer you to our fraud department right away. But I should mention that if this turns out not to be fraud, if you did authorize this transfer and simply forgot, there may be fees associated with the investigation. The threat was subtle but clear. If I couldn't prove I was a victim, I'd end up paying for the privilege of having my own money stolen. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the fraud department, filling out reports and answering questions and providing documentation to prove that I was who I said I was, and that I hadn't authorized the transfer. When I finally hung up, my head was pounding and my stomach was churning with anxiety. The bank had temporarily frozen my accounts pending investigation, which meant I couldn't access my own money until they determined whether or not I'd been robbed. The investigation could take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. I sat in the guest room that had become my prison, staring at the printout of my bank statement, trying to figure out who could have done this. The list of people who had access to my personal information was short. My financial advisor, my accountant, the mortgage company where I'd co-signed Danny and Sophia's loan, and my family. My family. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Danny and Sophia had seen me enter my banking passwords countless times when I'd helped them with their own financial planning. They'd been in the room when I'd given my social security number to various customer service representatives. They'd heard me answer security questions with my mother's maiden name and the name of my first pet. But surely my own son wouldn't steal from me. Surely the woman who called me Mama Joe and cried grateful tears when I helped them buy their house wouldn't forge my signature to take my money. I was still trying to process this possibility when Sophia knocked on my door. Mama Joe, can I come in? Her voice was sweet and concerned, the same tone she'd used when she was asking me to move in temporarily 6 months ago. Of course, I said, quickly shoving the bank statement under a pillow. Sophia entered wearing her silk pajamas and fuzzy slippers, her hand resting protectively on her barely visible baby bump. At 4 months pregnant, she was in that glowing stage where everything about her radiated health and happiness. I just wanted to check on you, she said, settling into the armchair by the window. You seemed upset when you came home from work yesterday. Everything okay? I studied her face, looking for any sign of guilt or deception. But Sophia looked exactly like she always did. Genuinely concerned, slightly tired from pregnancy, and completely innocent. Just some banking issues, I said carefully. Nothing major. Oh no, Sophia said, her eyebrows drawing together with worry. What kind of banking issues? Maybe Danny could help? He's so good with computers and financial stuff. The offer seemed genuine, but something about it made my skin crawl. If Danny and Sophia were behind the theft, offering to help with my banking problems would be the perfect way to cover their tracks. It's probably just a computer glitch, I said. The bank is looking into it. Well, if you need anything, you know we're here for you, Sophia said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. You take such good care of us. It's time we returned the favor. After she left, I sat staring at the door for a long time. Either Sophia was the world's most talented actress, or she genuinely had no idea that someone had stolen $3,000 from my account. But if it wasn't her and Danny, then who? Over the next few days, I found myself watching my son and daughter-in-law with new eyes. I paid attention to their conversations, their phone calls, their computer usage. I noticed things I'd never noticed before, or things I'd noticed but dismissed as unimportant. Like how Danny always seemed to be checking his phone during dinner, scrolling through what looked like banking or financial apps. Like how Sophia had started receiving packages almost daily, expensive-looking boxes from high-end retailers that she'd quickly whisk away to their bedroom before I could see what was inside. Like how they'd started talking about vacation plans and home renovations with the casual confidence of people who had plenty of money to spend. When I'd moved in with them, their financial situation had seemed tight, but manageable. Danny made good money as a software engineer, and Sophia's marketing job paid well, but they'd been genuinely stressed about the mortgage payments and talked frequently about needing to budget carefully. Now they seemed to have money for everything: new furniture, designer maternity clothes, a high-end security system installation, premium cable packages and streaming services. When I'd casually mentioned that they seemed to be doing better financially, Danny had credited a bonus from work and some freelance projects Sophia had picked up. But something didn't add up. If they were doing so well, why did they still need me to clean their house and cook their meals? Why hadn't they hired professional help? Why was I still sleeping in their guest room, 6 months after promising it would be temporary? The answer came to me gradually, piece by piece, as I started paying closer attention to the details of my life in their house. I wasn't staying because they needed my help. I was staying because they needed my access. Living in their house meant they could monitor my mail, my phone calls, my computer usage. They could see when bills arrived, when bank statements came, when I received important financial documents. They could watch me enter passwords and overhear me giving personal information over the phone. More than that, having me there meant they could control my schedule, my social life, my contact with the outside world. I hadn't seen my friends in months because I was always too tired from cleaning their house. I hadn't been to my usual doctor's appointments because I was too busy taking care of their needs. I'd become isolated, dependent on them for companionship and purpose. The realization was terrifying. Somehow, without my noticing, my son and his wife had turned me into a prisoner in their home while systematically stealing my money and my independence. But I needed proof before I could act. Accusations without evidence would just make me look like a paranoid old woman, and they could easily gaslight me into believing I was imagining things. So I started paying attention, real attention. I began noting down their activities, their purchases, their conversations. I started checking my computer's browsing history and discovered searches I'd never made for financial institutions and loan companies. I found temporary files on my laptop for documents I'd never created, applications for credit lines I'd never requested. Most damning of all, I discovered a hidden folder on the computer I'd let them borrow occasionally, filled with scanned copies of my driver's license, social security card, and bank statements. All the documents someone would need to forge my identity and access my accounts. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still couldn't quite believe it. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through every childhood illness. This was the young man I'd cheered at graduation, the person I'd sacrificed everything to give a better life than I'd had. How could he do this to me? The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in March. I'd gotten up early to start breakfast and found Danny in the kitchen, coffee in hand, looking through a stack of mail. When he saw me, he quickly shuffled the papers together, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like bank statements. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice slightly strained. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, moving to the coffee maker. "What's all that?" "Just bills and stuff," Danny said, but he was holding the papers close to his chest, clearly not wanting me to see them. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked casually. "I've been thinking about switching banks, and I'm curious what rates you guys are getting." Danny's face went pale. "These are just, personal financial stuff. Kind of private." "Danny, I'm your mother, and I'm the one who co-signed your mortgage. I think I have a right to know how you're managing your finances." For a moment, we stared at each other across the kitchen. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the rapid mental assessment of how much trouble he might be in. Finally, he sighed and handed me the papers. The documents were indeed bank statements, but not for accounts I recognized. The names on the statements were variations of my name: Joanne M. Carter, J. Margaret Carter, Joan Carter, all using my social security number, my address, my personal information, all showing balances that added up to more than $50,000. "Danny," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "what is this?" "Mom, I can explain," he said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "It's not what it looks like. We were going to tell you. We were going to pay everything back. You stole from me." The words came out flat, emotionless. I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. We borrowed, Danny said desperately. We borrowed, and we were going to pay it back with interest. The house needed so much more work than we expected, and Sophia's medical bills have been huge, and I lost that big client at work. You forged my signature. You opened accounts in my name. You stole my identity. Each statement was a fact, delivered without emotion because I couldn't process the emotional weight of what I was discovering. Mom, please, just listen to me, Danny pleaded. We were desperate. The baby is coming, and we needed to make some improvements to the house to make it safe. And Sophia hasn't been able to work as much because of the pregnancy complications. Pregnancy complications? I interrupted. What pregnancy complications? She's been fine. She's been going to yoga classes and lunch dates with her friends. Danny's face crumpled. There have been some scares, some bleeding. The doctor said she needs to take it easy, but she didn't want to worry you. I realized he was lying. Smoothly, desperately, but lying nonetheless. Sophia hadn't had any pregnancy complications. She'd been working full-time, going out with friends, traveling for work conferences. The pregnancy had been textbook normal. How much? I asked. How much what? How much money have you stolen from me? Danny looked down at his hands. I'd have to add it all up. It's not just one account. There are a few different. How much, Danny? Maybe 70, 80,000 total. But Mom, I swear to you, we're going to pay every penny back. I got a promotion at work, and Sophia's company is giving her a bonus, and we've been saving. $80,000, almost all of my inheritance from Aunt Margaret. Money I'd planned to live on during retirement. Money that represented my security and independence and freedom. Where's the money now? I asked. Some of it went to house improvements. The new HVAC system, the security system, some of the furniture. Some went to medical bills and baby expenses. And some, he trailed off. Some what? Some went to pay down Sophia's student loans and credit card debt. But Mom, that was actually smart financial planning. Her interest rates were really high, so paying those off first made sense mathematically. I felt something snap inside me. They hadn't just stolen my money for emergencies or necessities. They'd used it to pay off their own debts, to buy luxury items, to improve their credit scores and financial position while destroying mine. I want you to transfer every penny back to my accounts, I said quietly. Today. Mom, I can't do that today. The money isn't liquid. It's tied up in the house improvements and loan payments. But I can start paying you back monthly. Maybe $500 a month to start, and then more as our financial situation improves. $500 a month. At that rate, it would take me 13 years to get my money back. 13 years of hoping they'd continue to make payments. 13 years of being financially dependent on the people who'd robbed me. Get out, I said. What? Get out of this kitchen, get out of this house, get Sophia and get out. Mom, you're being unreasonable. This is our house. We can't just get out. We have a mortgage. We have a baby coming. You have a mortgage that I co-signed and a down payment that I provided for a house you bought with my stolen money, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. And if you don't want me to call the police right now and have you arrested for identity theft and fraud, you'll get out of my sight while I figure out what to do next. Danny's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, anger, fear, and finally, calculation. Mom, if you call the police, you'll destroy my career. You'll destroy Sophia's career. You'll destroy your grandchild's future. Is that really what you want? The threat was clear. If I pursued this legally, I'd be the villain who sent her pregnant daughter-in-law and soon-to-be father-son to jail. I'd be the grandmother who destroyed her grandchild's family before the baby was even born. It was masterfully done. Even caught red-handed, they were still manipulating me, still making me responsible for protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. Get out, I repeated. Now. Danny left the kitchen, and I heard him talking to Sophia in urgent, hushed tones upstairs. A few minutes later, they came down together. Sophia's eyes were red from crying, and she looked fragile and vulnerable in her bathrobe. Mama Joe, she said, her voice breaking. Danny told me what happened. I had no idea he was using your information. I thought the money was coming from his work bonuses. I feel terrible. I looked at her face, at the tears streaming down her cheeks, at the hand protectively covering her belly. If she was acting, she was phenomenal at it. If she was telling the truth, then I was about to blame an innocent pregnant woman for her husband's crimes. But I thought about the hidden folder on the computer, about the searches for financial institutions, about the way she'd been the one encouraging me to move in, to help more, to become more involved in their daily lives. Sophia, I said quietly, did you know about the Carter family trust? Her face went completely blank for just a split second before the tears resumed. The what? The trust that money was transferred to from my checking account. Did you know about it? I don't know anything about any trust, she said, but her voice sounded slightly different. Less natural, more careful. Did you know that someone used my personal information to open credit accounts in my name? Mama Joe, I don't understand what you're asking me. What credit accounts? I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statements Danny had been trying to hide. These accounts, all in variations of my name, all using my social security number. Sophia studied the papers, her face a mask of confused concern. I've never seen these before. Danny, what is she talking about? But I was watching her eyes, and I saw the moment of recognition before she covered it with confusion. She knew exactly what those statements were. She'd probably helped create the accounts. Pack your bags, I said. Both of you. I want you out of my house. Your house? Sophia's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. This is our house, Mama Joe. We bought it. Our names are on the deed. Your names are on the deed of a house you bought with my money, using a mortgage I co-signed after stealing my identity to fund the down payment, I said. And if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police and let them sort out who belongs where. The transformation in Sophia was swift and startling. The tears stopped. The vulnerable, fragile, pregnant woman disappeared, replaced by someone calculating and cold. You won't call the police, she said confidently, because you're not stupid. You know that if Danny goes to jail, you'll never see your grandchild. You know that if I'm charged with a crime, I could lose the baby from stress. You know that destroying our lives won't get your money back any faster. She was right, and we all knew it. Calling the police would result in arrests and charges, and a legal mess that could drag on for years. Danny would lose his job. Sophia might face complications with her pregnancy. My grandchild would be born into chaos and possibly poverty. But more than that, I realized I didn't want the police involved. I didn't want lawyers and judges and prosecutors making decisions about my family's future. I wanted to handle this myself on my terms, with consequences that I chose. You have 1 week, I said finally. Find somewhere else to live. Figure out your finances. But you're not staying in this house that you bought with my stolen money. And what about the mortgage? Danny asked. What about all the money we've put into this place? That's your problem to figure out, I said. You should have thought about that before you decided to rob me. They left that afternoon to stay with Sophia's parents, taking only enough clothes for a few days. Before they walked out the door, Sophia turned to me with one final manipulation. I hope you're happy, she said, tears streaming down her face again. I hope destroying your son's family was worth it. I hope you can live with yourself knowing that your grandchild will grow up knowing their grandmother chose money over family. After they left, I sat in the perfect house they'd bought with my stolen money, surrounded by the furniture they'd purchased with my forged credit, and tried to figure out what to do next. I had 7 days to decide how to respond to the biggest betrayal of my life. 7 days to figure out whether I was going to be a victim or whether I was going to fight back. The woman who'd raised Danny alone, who'd worked her way up from janitor to management, who'd built a life from nothing, knew exactly what she was going to do. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done to me. And that meant going through every financial document, every bank statement, Every piece of evidence I could find to map out exactly how they'd systematically destroyed my financial life while I was busy cleaning their toilets. What I discovered over the next 3 days would make the $80,000 look like pocket change. What I found in their home office after they left was worse than anything I could have imagined. Behind Danny's desk, in a filing cabinet I'd never thought to examine, was a complete record of their financial crimes against me. Every forged document, every falsified application, every stolen penny, meticulously cataloged and organized as if they were running a legitimate business instead of systematically destroying their own mother. The folder labeled JC Financial contained photocopies of my driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, and passport. Documents I'd never given them permission to copy, information they'd obtained by going through my purse and personal papers while I was sleeping or cleaning their house. Beneath the identification documents were credit applications bearing my forged signature for cards I'd never requested from companies I'd never contacted. They hadn't just stolen $80,000. They'd opened 17 different credit accounts in my name over the past 8 months, each one maxed out and then abandoned. Store credit cards for furniture and electronics. High-limit Visa and MasterCard accounts used for cash advances and luxury purchases. A home equity line of credit against my own house that I'd never even known existed. My hands trembled as I calculated the total damage. $347,000. They had stolen nearly $350,000 from me while I was living in their house, cooking their meals, and cleaning their bathrooms. Money that represented 35 years of careful saving, decades of sacrifice and planning for my retirement, my security, my independence. But the most devastating discovery was a handwritten note in Sophia's careful script, tucked between the credit applications like a bookmark. Phase 2. Power of attorney when pregnancy complications require bed rest. Phase 3. Joe moves to assisted living after quotes concerning incidents. All accounts consolidated under Carter Family Trust by Christmas. They hadn't just been stealing from me. They'd been planning to have me declared incompetent and take control of my entire estate. The pregnancy complications Sophia had mentioned to Danny weren't real yet, but they were part of a plan to isolate me further, to create a medical emergency that would justify giving them legal control over my finances and my life. I sat in Danny's leather office chair, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, and tried to comprehend the scope of what they'd intended to do to me. They weren't just thieves. They were predators who had systematically targeted their own family member, planning to steal everything I owned and then warehouse me in some nursing facility where I couldn't interfere with their spending. The woman who had called me Mama Joe and cried grateful tears when I helped them buy their house had been plotting to steal my home from the very beginning. The son I'd raised alone and sacrificed everything for had been documenting my personal information like a criminal building a case file. But as I sat there absorbing the magnitude of their betrayal, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling destroyed or defeated, I felt a cold, clarifying anger unlike anything I'd ever experienced. They had underestimated me completely. They'd seen a lonely widow, a doting grandmother-to-be, a woman so desperate for family connection that she'd accept any treatment as long as it meant being needed. They hadn't seen the woman who'd fought her way out of poverty, who'd raised a child alone while working multiple jobs, who'd clawed her way up from hospital janitor to facilities manager through sheer determination and intelligence. They'd forgotten that I was the same person who'd negotiated million-dollar facility contracts and managed complex budgets and supervised teams of skilled workers. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that I was the woman who'd taught them everything they knew about finances and planning and careful record-keeping. Every trick they'd used against me, I'd taught them. Every system they'd exploited, I'd shown them how to navigate. I spent the next 2 days documenting everything I'd found, photographing every document, creating my own careful record of their crimes. Then I made a series of phone calls that would change the trajectory of this entire situation. The first call was to my financial advisor, Margaret Stevens, a sharp woman in her 50s, who'd been managing my investments for the past decade. Margaret had always been direct and no nonsense, which was exactly what I needed. "Joe, I've been worried about you," Margaret said as soon as she heard my voice. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks about some unusual account activity, but you haven't returned my calls." "I've been staying with my son and daughter-in-law," I explained. What kind of unusual activity? Large transfers from your investment accounts, liquidation of several CDs before maturity, applications for loans against your retirement funds. Joe, these transactions don't match your typical financial behavior at all. Are you sure you authorized all of these? My stomach dropped. Margaret, I didn't authorize any transfers or loans. How much money are we talking about? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Joe, someone has systematically liquidated almost your entire investment portfolio over the past 6 months. We're talking about just over $400,000. $400,000. Combined with the credit fraud I'd already discovered, they'd stolen more than $750,000 from me. My entire life savings, my retirement security, my emergency funds, everything I'd built over decades of careful planning and sacrifice. Margaret, I need you to freeze all my accounts immediately. Change all the passwords, require in-person verification for any transactions, and flag my social security number for fraud monitoring. Of course. Joe, do you know who did this? Do you need me to contact the authorities? I know exactly who did this, I said, and I'm going to handle it myself. The second call was to my attorney, Robert Chen, who'd helped me with my estate planning and the legal paperwork when I'd bought my house. Robert was a family law specialist who'd seen every kind of financial abuse and exploitation imaginable. Mrs. Carter, what you're describing is elder financial abuse, Robert said after I'd explained the situation. It's a felony in this state, and the penalties are severe. With the amounts you're talking about, your son and daughter-in-law could face decades in prison. I don't want them to go to prison, Robert. I want my money back, and I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. The challenge is that recovering stolen money often requires criminal prosecution, Robert explained. Civil litigation can take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, with no guarantee of recovery. Criminal prosecution means the state handles the investigation and prosecution costs, and restitution is usually part of any plea agreement. What if I could get them to admit to the theft and agree to repay everything voluntarily? Do you think that's possible? From what you've described, they seem to believe they were entitled to take your money. Let me ask you a hypothetical question, Robert. If someone had detailed documentation of financial crimes, recorded confessions, and evidence of ongoing fraud, what kind of leverage would that give them in negotiating a resolution? Robert's voice became more cautious. Mrs. Carter, I hope you're not planning to do anything that could put you in legal jeopardy. Extortion and blackmail are serious crimes. I'm not planning to extort anyone, I said carefully. I'm planning to present them with a clear picture of their legal exposure and give them an opportunity to make things right before I involve law enforcement. That's actually a reasonable approach, Robert admitted. If you can document everything and get them to agree to repayment, it could save everyone a lot of pain. But Mrs. Carter, you need to be very careful about how you handle this. One wrong move could make you look like the aggressor instead of the victim. The third call was to my old friend Janet from the hospital, who'd worked in medical records for 20 years before retiring. Janet knew more about healthcare fraud and documentation than anyone I'd ever met. Joe, honey, I've been so worried about you, Janet said. You just disappeared from book club and water aerobics without saying anything. We thought something had happened to you. Something did happen to me, Janet, and I need your help. I explained the situation, focusing on Sophia's plan to claim pregnancy complications as justification for needing power of attorney over my finances. That's a classic pattern, Janet said grimly. We saw it all the time at the hospital. Family members who'd claim their elderly relatives were having cognitive issues or health crises to justify taking control of their finances. The medical fraud angle makes this especially serious. I need to know how to protect myself from false medical claims, I said. If Sophia tries to have me declared incompetent or claims I'm having health issues, what can I do to defend myself? First, you need a comprehensive medical evaluation from an independent physician who can document your cognitive and physical health. Second, you need witnesses who can testify to your mental state and decision-making ability. Third, you need to make sure all your legal documents are up to date and specifically address who can and cannot make medical or financial decisions on your behalf. Can you recommend someone for the medical evaluation? Dr. Patricia Williams at Riverside Medical does comprehensive geriatric assessments. She specializes in cases where there are family disputes about cognitive capacity. I'll call her office and see if she can fit you in this week. The fourth call was the most difficult. I dialed Sophia's mother, Eleanor, a woman I'd met several times during family gatherings but never really gotten to know. Eleanor was a retired school principal, a sharp woman in her early 60s who'd always struck me as practical and fair-minded. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Jo Carter, Danny's mother. I need to speak with you about something very serious involving Sophia and Danny." "Oh my goodness, Jo, are you all right?" "Sophia said you'd had some kind of breakdown and threw them out of their house. We've been so worried about you." So they'd already started the narrative that I was mentally unstable. Classic abuser behavior. Discredit the victim before they could tell their story. "Mrs. Thompson, I haven't had a breakdown. I discovered that Sophia and Danny have been systematically stealing money from me for months. I have documentation of credit fraud, identity theft, and plans to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my estate." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Eleanor spoke in a very different tone. "Jo, those are very serious accusations. Do you have proof of what you're claiming?" "I have extensive documentation. Bank records, forged applications, handwritten notes detailing their plans to isolate me and take control of my finances. Mrs. Thompson, they've stolen almost $750,000 from me." $750,000. Eleanor's voice trailed off. "Jo, I think you and I need to meet in person. Can you come to my house this evening?" Eleanor Thompson lived in a well-maintained ranch house about 20 minutes from Magnolia Avenue, in a neighborhood of mature trees and carefully tended gardens. When she opened the door, I could see the family resemblance to Sophia, the same blue eyes, the same delicate bone structure. But where Sophia projected warmth and vulnerability, Eleanor radiated competence and authority. "Come in, Jo. I've made coffee, and I think we need to have a very serious conversation." Eleanor's living room was comfortable but formal, filled with family photos and the kind of furniture that was meant to last generations. She settled into her armchair and studied my face with the intensity of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Before we start, I want you to know that I've always respected you," Eleanor said. "Raising Danny alone, building your career at the hospital, the way you've supported Sophia and Danny's marriage, you've always struck me as a very sensible, capable woman." "Thank you," I said, unsure where this was leading, which is why I'm having trouble understanding what Sophia told me when they showed up at my door 3 days ago. She said you'd become increasingly paranoid and controlling, that you'd been making wild accusations about their finances, and that you'd finally snapped and ordered them out of their own house. And what do you think about that story?" Eleanor's smile was grim. "I think Sophia has been lying to me about a lot of things. For starters, she told me that you'd been living with them because you were having financial difficulties and couldn't afford your own house anymore. She made it sound like they were doing you a favor by taking you in. That's not true at all. I moved in temporarily to help during her pregnancy, but it became permanent without anyone asking my permission." I suspected as much. Sophia has always been very good at presenting situations in whatever light served her best. Eleanor leaned forward. "Jo, I need to ask you something directly. Did Sophia and Danny steal money from you?" I pulled out the folder of documentation I'd prepared and placed it on the coffee table between us. "They stole $747,000 from me over the past 8 months. They opened credit accounts in my name, liquidated my investment portfolio, and were planning to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my remaining assets." Eleanor's face went pale as she flipped through the documents. Bank statements, credit applications, the handwritten note about phases of their plan, everything laid out in chronological order. "My God," she whispered. This is monstrous. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand that I don't want to destroy Sophia and Danny. I don't want to send them to prison or ruin their lives, but I also can't let them get away with this." Eleanor looked up from the papers with tears in her eyes. "What do you want to do?" "I want them to admit what they've done, repay every penny they stole, and agree to conditions that will prevent them from ever doing this to anyone else. If they agree to those terms, I won't involve law enforcement. And if they don't agree, then I'll file criminal charges and let the justice system handle it. With this much documentation, they'll both go to prison for a very long time. Eleanor sat back in her chair, looking suddenly older than her 62 years. Joe, there's something else you need to know. Something that makes this situation even worse than you realize. My stomach clenched. What do you mean? Sophia isn't just stealing from you. She's been stealing from her own family too. Last month, I discovered that she'd forged my signature on a loan application, using my house as collateral. When I confronted her about it, she claimed it was a mistake, that the loan officer had confused our information. How much? $50,000. And when I started looking into it further, I found out she'd also taken money from her grandmother's account. Grandma Rose has dementia, and Sophia has been her primary caregiver. We trusted her to handle Grandma's finances, but she's been stealing from a 90-year-old woman with Alzheimer's. The picture was becoming even clearer. Sophia wasn't just an opportunistic thief who'd gotten in over her head. She was a predator who systematically targeted vulnerable family members, using her charm and their trust to gain access to their finances. Does anyone else in your family know about this? I haven't told anyone yet. I've been trying to figure out how to handle it without destroying the family. But Joe, after seeing what she's done to you, I realize we're dealing with something much more serious than family drama. Eleanor and I spent the next 2 hours planning our approach. We would confront Sophia and Danny together, presenting them with all the evidence of their crimes against both families. We would give them exactly one chance to admit their guilt, agree to full restitution, and submit to ongoing financial monitoring. If they refused, we would file criminal charges the next day. Joe, I want you to know that whatever happens, you have my full support, Eleanor said as I prepared to leave. What they've done is unforgivable, and I'm ashamed that my daughter was capable of this kind of cruelty. She's still your daughter, and she's still carrying my grandchild, I replied. That's why we're giving them this chance to make things right. Eleanor walked me to my car, her face set with determination. They're coming over for dinner tomorrow night. Can you be here at 6 o'clock? I'll be here. As I drove back to the empty house on Magnolia Avenue, the house they'd bought with my stolen money, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Tomorrow night, I would learn whether my son and his wife were capable of acknowledging their crimes and working to make amends, or whether they would force me to destroy their lives to protect myself and others. Either way, I was done being a victim. The woman who'd spent 6 months cleaning their toilets while they robbed her blind was gone forever. In her place was someone much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The confrontation that would determine all our futures was less than 24 hours away, and I was ready for whatever came next. The dinner at Eleanor's house was set for 6 o'clock, but I arrived at 5:30 to help with final preparations. Eleanor answered the door wearing a navy blue dress and the kind of steely expression I imagined she'd worn when dealing with difficult parents during her years as a school principal. They don't know you're coming, she said as she led me to the kitchen. I told them I wanted to have a family dinner to discuss the situation with you, but I didn't mention that you'd be here to speak for yourself. Good. The element of surprise will make it harder for them to coordinate their lies. Eleanor had prepared a simple meal, nothing fancy or celebratory. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a reckoning. We set the dining room table with her everyday china and placed 2 thick folders at the head of the table where I would be sitting. One folder contained all the evidence of their theft from me. The other contained the documentation Eleanor had gathered about Sophia's crimes against her own family. At exactly 6 o'clock, we heard Danny's car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched them approach the front door. Sophia was dressed in a flowing maternity dress that emphasized her pregnancy, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Danny carried a bouquet of flowers, probably intended as an apology for whatever version of events they'd told Eleanor. The moment they walked through the door and saw me sitting at the dining room table, their expressions shifted from nervous anticipation to shock and then to something that looked like panic. "Mama Joe," Sophia said, her voice carefully modulated to sound surprised but pleased. "What a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you'd be here." "Sit down," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Both of you." Danny and Sophia exchanged glances before taking seats across from me. The flowers Danny had brought lay forgotten on the entry table. "Mom, if this is some kind of intervention, you need to understand that we're the victims here," Danny said, his voice defensive. "We've been trying to help, and we've been met with paranoia and accusations." "Danny," I said quietly, "I want you to look at the folders in front of me and think very carefully about what you're going to say next." For the first time since they'd entered the house, Danny looked directly at the documentation spread across the table. I watched the color drain from his face as he recognized bank statements, credit applications, and his own handwriting on various documents. Before anyone says anything else, Eleanor interjected, "I want to make sure we all understand the seriousness of this situation. Joe and I have spent considerable time documenting financial crimes that have been committed against both of our families. We're here tonight to give you an opportunity to acknowledge what you've done and work toward making things right." Sophia's mask of innocent surprise was slipping. "I don't know what you're talking about. What financial crimes?" I opened the first folder and pulled out the bank statement that had started my investigation. "Sophia, this is a record of a $3,000 transfer from my checking account to something called the Carter Family Trust, a trust I never authorized and never knew existed." "I don't know anything about that," Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This," I continued, pulling out more documents, "is a credit application for a $60,000 line of credit, signed with my forged signature and using my personal information." Danny was staring at the table, saying nothing. "This is a record of the liquidation of my entire investment portfolio, totaling $403,000, transferred to accounts I never opened. And this," Eleanor said, opening her own folder, "is documentation of a $50,000 loan taken against my house with my daughter's forged signature." Sophia's face went completely white. "Mom, that was a misunderstanding. I explained that to you." "No, Sophia. This is bank fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse." Eleanor's voice was steady but filled with disappointment, "just like what you've done to Grandma Rose, who trusted you to help with her finances while she battles dementia." The room fell silent. Danny continued staring at the table while Sophia looked back and forth between Eleanor and me, clearly calculating her options. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sophia finally said, her voice taking on the sweet, vulnerable tone I'd heard so many times before. "Yes, we borrowed some money from Joe, but it was always with the understanding that we'd pay it back." "And the loan against your house, Mom? That was supposed to be a joint investment opportunity." "Borrowed?" I asked. "Sophia, you forged my signature on documents I never saw, opened accounts I never authorized, and liquidated investments without my knowledge or consent. That's not borrowing. That's stealing." "We were desperate," Danny said suddenly, looking up with tears in his eyes. "The house needed so much work, and Sophia's medical bills were huge, and I lost that big contract at work. We were going to lose everything. So you decided to steal everything from me instead?" "We were going to pay you back," Danny insisted. "Every penny. With interest." "Danny," Eleanor said gently, "how are you planning to pay back $750,000 on your salaries?" The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Danny's face went even paler. "$750,000? Sophia whispered. "That can't be right." I pulled out the detailed accounting I'd prepared. Credit fraud, $347,000. Investment liquidation, $403,000. That's $750,000 from me alone. Add the $50,000 you stole from your mother and whatever you've taken from your grandmother, and we're looking at close to $1 million in theft. Sophia started crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen so many times before, but the raw, desperate crying of someone who just realized how completely trapped they were. "We never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed. "It started small, just a few thousand to cover some unexpected expenses. But then we needed more, and it just spiraled out of control." "What about the plan to have me declared incompetent?" I asked. "What about the notes I found describing phases of taking control of my entire estate?" Danny's head snapped up. "What notes?" I pulled out the handwritten document in Sophia's careful script. "Phase 2, power of attorney. when pregnancy complications require bed rest. Phase 3. Joe moves to assisted living after concerning incidents. All accounts consolidated under Carter Family Trust by Christmas. Danny stared at the paper in horror. Sophia, what is this? I was just brainstorming, Sophia said weakly. I was trying to figure out how to help Joe manage her finances better. She's getting older, and I was worried about her ability to handle complex financial decisions. You were planning to steal my house, I said flatly. You were planning to have me declared incompetent and warehouse me in a nursing home so you could take everything I've worked for my entire life. The facade finally crumbled completely. Sophia's tears stopped, and when she looked up, her face was hard and calculating. You know what, Joe? Maybe that would have been better for everyone. You're alone, you're getting older, and you clearly can't manage your own finances if we were able to take advantage of you so easily. At least if we'd had control of your money, it would have been used to provide for your grandchild instead of sitting in some bank account earning nothing. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This was who she really was underneath the sweet daughter-in-law facade. Someone who viewed my life savings as resources she was entitled to take. Danny, I said, looking directly at my son, is this what you believe? That I deserve to be robbed because I trusted you? Danny looked torn between his wife and his mother, his face a mask of anguish. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. But Sophia's right that we could have managed your money better than you were managing it yourself. I see. The disappointment I felt was so profound it was almost physically painful. This was my son, the child I'd raised alone, the person I'd sacrificed everything to give a better life. And he genuinely believed he was entitled to steal from me because he thought he knew better how to spend my money. Eleanor had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Sophia, Danny, you have a choice to make right now. You can acknowledge what you've done, agree to full restitution, and submit to ongoing financial monitoring while you work to pay back what you've stolen. Or Joe and I can file criminal charges tomorrow morning. Criminal charges? Sophia's voice rose to almost a shriek. You can't be serious. I'm pregnant. Danny has a career. You destroy our entire family over money? You destroyed our family when you decided to steal from us, Eleanor said calmly. We're just deciding whether to handle this within the family or let the justice system deal with it. What exactly are you proposing? Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out the agreement my attorney had helped me draft. You will sign confessions acknowledging the full scope of your theft. You will transfer ownership of the house on Magnolia Avenue to me, since it was purchased entirely with my stolen money. You will surrender all credit cards and accounts opened in my name or your mother's name. You will submit to monthly financial audits for the next 5 years, and you will pay restitution of $1,500 per month until the debt is fully repaid. $1,500 a month? Sophia said. That's impossible. We can't afford that much. Then you should have thought about that before you stole $750,000 from me, I replied. At $1,500 a month, it will take you 41 years to pay me back, without interest. And if we refuse? Danny asked. Then tomorrow morning, Eleanor and I will file criminal charges for identity theft, bank fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. With the documentation we have, you'll both go to prison for decades. Danny will lose his job and his professional licenses. Sophia will likely give birth in prison, and your child will grow up visiting their parents behind bars. The room fell silent again. Sophia was crying quietly, her hands wrapped around her belly. Danny was staring at the agreement, reading through the terms with the expression of someone watching his life collapse in real time. There's one more thing, Eleanor added. Sophia, you'll also need to make full restitution to Grandma Rose and agree never to have any involvement in her financial affairs again. And you'll both need to undergo counseling for financial crimes and addiction. We're not addicts, Sophia protested. You systematically stole money from vulnerable family members to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, I said. If that's not addiction, it's something worse. Danny finally looked up from the agreement. Mom, if we sign this, will you still be part of our lives? Will you still want to be a grandmother to our child? The question broke my heart. Despite everything they'd done, Despite the months of lies and manipulation and theft, he was still my son, and the baby Sophia was carrying was still my grandchild. Danny, I will always love you, but trust is earned, and you've destroyed 32 years of trust in the span of 8 months. If you sign this agreement and honor its terms, if you work to make things right and prove that you understand the magnitude of what you've done, then yes, I'll be part of your lives. But things will never be the same between us. And if we don't sign, then I'll mourn the son I thought I raised, and I'll pray that your child grows up to be a better person than their parents. Sophia was studying the agreement now, her face calculating. What about the house? If we sign ownership over to you, where are we supposed to live? That's your problem to solve, Eleanor said firmly. You can rent it back from Joe, or you can find somewhere else to live. But you don't get to keep a house you bought with stolen money. This is insane, Sophia said. Joe, you're destroying your own family over money. Is that really what you want? Sophia, you destroyed this family when you decided to steal from me. I'm just determining whether there's anything left worth saving. The next hour was the longest of my life. Danny and Sophia huddled together, whispering urgently, occasionally looking at the agreement or the evidence folders. Several times, Sophia seemed ready to walk out, but Danny would pull her back to continue their whispered conference. Finally, Danny spoke. We need to talk to a lawyer before we sign anything. That's your right, I said. But understand that the longer you wait, the more likely it becomes that Eleanor and I will decide to let law enforcement handle this instead. How long do we have to decide? Eleanor and I exchanged glances. 48 hours, she said. If you haven't signed the agreement by Thursday evening, we file criminal charges Friday morning. And in the meantime? In the meantime, all the fraudulent accounts remain frozen, you continue staying at Eleanor's house, and you both start looking for jobs that will allow you to afford the restitution payments. Sophia stood up abruptly. I need some air. This is all too much. She walked out to Eleanor's back porch, leaving Danny alone with Eleanor and me. My son looked older than his 32 years, worn down by the weight of what he'd done and the consequences he was facing. Mom, he said quietly, I want you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just a small loan that we were going to pay back quickly, but then one thing led to another. Danny, you didn't borrow money from me, you stole it. You forged my signature, you lied to me for months, and you were planning to have me declared incompetent so you could steal even more. Those aren't the actions of someone who made a mistake. Those are the actions of someone who sees me as a resource to be exploited, rather than a person to be respected. I know how it looks, but I do respect you. I do love you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have let me spend 6 months cleaning your toilets while you were robbing me blind. If you respected me, you wouldn't have forged my signature on documents that could have destroyed my credit and my financial security. Danny started crying then, real tears of remorse and shame. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to make it right. You start by signing that agreement and spending the next 40 years paying back what you stole. You get counseling to figure out how you became someone capable of doing this to your own mother. And you make sure your child grows up understanding the difference between right and wrong, something you apparently never learned. When Sophia came back inside, her face was set with determination. We're not signing anything tonight. We need time to think, and we need legal advice. That's your choice, I said, standing up to leave. You have 48 hours. As I gathered the folders and prepared to go, Danny caught my arm. Mom, whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. I looked into his face, searching for some sign of the little boy I'd raised, the young man I'd been so proud of. He was still there, buried under layers of poor choices and moral compromise, but I wasn't sure he could find his way back. I know you're sorry, Danny, but sorry doesn't pay back $750,000. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that you were planning to steal my house and have me locked away in a nursing home. I drove home through the quiet streets, past houses where families were settling in for ordinary evenings of homework and television and bedtime routines. Normal families who weren't dealing with theft and betrayal, and the complete destruction of everything they'd believed about each other. The house on Magnolia Avenue felt different when I walked through the front door. It was still the same beautiful colonial with the wraparound porch and 3-car garage, but now I knew it was a house built on lies and theft. Every room contained memories of the months I'd spent as an unpaid servant, cleaning and cooking while my son and his wife systematically destroyed my financial life. But it was also my house now, bought with my money, and I was no longer a guest or a victim. I was a homeowner who'd fought back against people who'd tried to destroy her, and I'd won. The next morning, I began the process of reclaiming my life. I met with Dr. Patricia Williams for the comprehensive medical evaluation that would document my cognitive and physical health, protecting me from any future attempts to have me declared incompetent. I changed all my passwords, implemented new security measures on all my accounts, and began the long process of rebuilding my credit and financial standing. I also did something I hadn't done in months. I called my friend Janet and asked if there was still room in the book club and water aerobics class. "Joe!" Janet's voice was filled with relief and joy. "We've been so worried about you. Of course there's room. There's always room for you." That afternoon, I received a call from Eleanor. Danny and Sophia had consulted with a lawyer who'd explained exactly how much trouble they were in. The attorney had advised them to sign the agreement and cooperate fully, because the alternative was almost certainly decades in prison. "They want to meet tomorrow evening to sign the papers," Eleanor said. "Joe, I think they finally understand that they don't have any other choice." "Good. And Eleanor? Thank you for standing with me on this. I couldn't have done it alone." "You would have done the same for me," she replied. "That's what real family does. They protect each other from predators, even when the predators share their DNA." 2 days later, I sat at Eleanor's dining room table again, watching Danny and Sophia sign confession letters and restitution agreements that would govern their lives for the next 4 decades. They looked defeated and bitter, like prisoners being forced to accept a plea bargain to avoid execution. "I hope you're satisfied," Sophia said as she signed the last document. "You've gotten your revenge." "This isn't revenge, Sophia, this is justice." "Revenge would have been letting you go to prison and having your child born behind bars." "You're still destroying our family." "No," I said firmly. "You destroyed our family when you decided to steal from us. I'm just deciding whether to rebuild it or walk away completely." After they'd signed everything and left Eleanor's house, probably forever, I sat in my car for a long time, processing what had just happened. In the span of 2 weeks, I'd discovered that my son and daughter-in-law were thieves, documented their crimes, confronted them with evidence of their betrayal, and forced them to agree to decades of restitution. I'd lost my illusions about my family, but I'd saved my financial future and protected other potential victims from their predatory behavior. Most importantly, I discovered that the woman I'd forgotten I was, the fighter who'd built a life from nothing and refused to be anyone's victim, was still there when I needed her. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden behind the house on Magnolia Avenue, reading a book Janet recommended and planning my first real vacation in years. Danny and Sophia make their monthly restitution payments on time, though we rarely speak beyond the financial transactions. They moved to a small apartment across town and are both working multiple jobs to afford the payments. Their daughter, my granddaughter Emma Rose, was born healthy and beautiful 3 months ago. I've met her twice, brief visits that were cordial but strained. She has Danny's dark hair and Sophia's blue eyes, and she deserves so much better than the parents she got. Maybe someday, when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell Emma the story of how her parents tried to steal her grandmother's life savings while making her clean their toilets. I'll tell her about the choice I made to fight back instead of accepting victim status. I'll teach her that love without respect is manipulation, that family is about more than DNA, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior. But for now, I'm focused on rebuilding the life they tried to take from me. I've rejoined book club and water aerobics. I'm planning a trip to Ireland that I was going to take with my inheritance money before they stole it. I'm volunteering at a local organization that helps elder abuse victims recover from financial crimes. Most importantly, I've learned that I am enough. I don't need to clean anyone's toilets to prove my worth. I don't need to accept crumbs of affection from people who see me as an ATM. I don't need to sacrifice my dignity and independence to feel needed. The woman who raised Danny alone, who worked her way up from janitor to facilities manager, who built a life from nothing, that woman is who I am. Not the victim they tried to turn me into, but the fighter who refused to go down without a battle. And I won. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 1 year after I discovered the bank statement that changed everything. The return address showed the law offices of Patterson, Mitchell & Associates, and for a moment my heart clenched with fear that Danny and Sophia were trying to challenge our agreement through some legal loophole. Instead, the letter contained news that left me staring at the paper in complete shock. Sophia had been arrested for running an elaborate financial fraud scheme at her new job, stealing over $200,000 from her employer's client accounts. She was facing federal charges that could put her in prison for decades, regardless of our family agreement. The irony wasn't lost on me. While making her monthly restitution payments to Eleanor and me, Sophia had apparently been unable to resist the temptation to steal from someone else. A leopard doesn't change its spots, as my grandmother used to say, and Sophia had proven that her theft from our family wasn't a one-time mistake born of desperation. It was who she was at her core. Danny had called Eleanor's house looking for support, but Eleanor had simply told him that his wife's actions were his problem to handle. She'd given him the same advice she'd given her daughter months earlier. Accept responsibility for your choices and face the consequences. The news should have brought me satisfaction, some sense of vindication that I'd been right about Sophia's character. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the child who would grow up with a mother in federal prison and a father struggling to survive financially while paying restitution to multiple victims. Little Emma Rose was walking now, taking tentative steps around Danny's cramped apartment when I visited every other Sunday. She had no idea that her world was about to be turned upside down again, that the mother who sang her lullabies would soon be wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes. The visits with Emma had become the most complicated part of my new reality. I loved her fiercely, this innocent child who carried my DNA in Danny's eyes, but every interaction was tinged with the knowledge of what her parents had done to me. When she reached for me with chubby toddler hands, I felt the pure joy of being a grandmother. When Danny handed her over with the same gentle smile he'd worn as a child himself, I felt the deep ache of loving someone who'd betrayed me so completely. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist I'd started seeing after the confrontation, had helped me understand that these conflicting emotions were normal and healthy. Love and hurt could coexist. Forgiveness and boundaries weren't mutually exclusive. I could be a loving grandmother while still protecting myself from further manipulation. Joe, you're allowed to love your son and granddaughter while also acknowledging that their actions caused you significant harm, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our sessions. Healing doesn't require you to pretend the abuse didn't happen, or to immediately trust people who've proven themselves untrustworthy. The therapy had been Eleanor's suggestion, another way she'd supported me through the aftermath of discovering our children's crimes. Eleanor had started her own counseling to process the guilt she felt about raising a daughter capable of such systematic cruelty. I keep wondering what I did wrong, Eleanor had confided during one of our weekly coffee dates, a tradition we'd established as we'd grown closer through our shared trauma. Was I too permissive? Too focused on achievement? How did I raise someone who could steal from her own grandmother? You didn't do anything wrong, I'd assured her. Some people make choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised. Sophia is an adult who chose to be a predator. Our friendship had become one of the unexpected gifts of this terrible situation. Eleanor and I had bonded through our shared experience of loving someone who'd betrayed us, and we'd found comfort in having someone who truly understood the complexity of our emotions. We supported each other through the legal proceedings, the family drama, and the slow process of rebuilding our lives. Eleanor had also become my closest ally in dealing with the extended family fallout. News of Sophia's arrest had spread through both families like wildfire, bringing out relatives who'd previously stayed silent about suspicious financial activities they'd noticed over the years. Danny's cousin Michelle called to tell me that Sophia had approached her about borrowing money for emergency medical expenses that had never materialized. My brother Robert admitted that he'd always felt uncomfortable with how quickly Sophia had gained access to family financial information during holiday gatherings. Even Sophia's own sister Jennifer revealed that she'd caught Sophia going through her purse during a family barbecue, though she'd dismissed it as absent-minded behavior at the time. The pattern was clear. Sophia had been systematically targeting family members for years, testing boundaries and gathering information for potential future theft. Eleanor and I had just been her most successful victims, the ones who'd trusted her enough to give her access to significant assets. The revelation brought a strange sense of relief mixed with horror. Relief that we hadn't been uniquely gullible or foolish to trust her. Horror at the scope of her predatory behavior and the number of people she'd viewed as potential marks rather than family members. The financial recovery had been slower than I'd hoped, but more successful than I'd feared. Working with a team of financial advisors and fraud specialists, I'd managed to recover about 60% of what had been stolen through insurance claims, bank fraud protections, and the liquidation of assets Danny and Sophia had purchased with my money. The house on Magnolia Avenue had been appraised at $420,000, significantly more than the down payment I'd provided. When I'd suggested selling it and splitting the equity with Danny, my attorney had firmly advised against any generosity that wasn't required by our agreement. "Mrs. Carter, this house represents your stolen money," Robert Chen had explained. "You don't owe Danny anything beyond what's explicitly stated in your agreement. In fact, given the scope of their theft, you're being extraordinarily generous by not pursuing additional civil remedies." So I'd kept the house, transforming it from a symbol of my victimization into a symbol of my strength. I'd redecorated extensively, removing every trace of Danny and Sophia's presence, and creating spaces that reflected my own taste and personality rather than theirs. The master bedroom became my sanctuary, painted in soft blues and filled with books and plants, and the kind of personal touches I'd never felt comfortable displaying when I was living as their guest. The home office became my command center, where I managed my finances and planned my future with the kind of careful attention I'd learned was necessary to protect myself. The guest room where I'd slept for 6 months was converted into a craft room, filled with the sewing and quilting supplies I'd given up when I'd moved in to help them. Reclaiming that space felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. The kitchen became the heart of my new life, where I cooked meals for one without feeling lonely, and hosted dinner parties for the friends I'd reconnected with. Janet from the hospital had become a regular visitor, along with several women from book club and water aerobics who'd welcomed me back without questions or judgment. "You seem different," Janet had observed during one of our dinners. "Stronger, somehow. More like the Joe I knew when we first started working together, before you got so focused on taking care of everyone else." She was right. The experience of being victimized and then fighting back had stripped away layers of people-pleasing and self-doubt I'd been carrying for years. I'd rediscovered the woman who'd raised a child alone while building a career, who'd negotiated complex facility contracts and managed difficult personnel situations. That woman had never needed anyone's approval to know her own worth. The volunteer work I'd started with Elder Justice Coalition had become one of the most meaningful parts of my new life. Every week, I met with seniors who'd been victimized by family members, helping them navigate the legal system and develop safety plans to protect themselves from further abuse. "Your story gives them hope," explained Maria Santos, the organization's director. "When they see that you fought back successfully and rebuilt your life, it helps them believe they can do the same." Some of the cases I encountered made my own experience seem almost minor by comparison. Widows whose children had stolen their homes and left them homeless. Elderly men whose caregivers had emptied their bank accounts and abandoned them without resources for food or medication. Grandparents who'd been isolated from their families and manipulated into signing over their entire estates. But every case also reinforced the lessons I'd learned. That family relationships based on exploitation weren't worth preserving. That setting boundaries wasn't selfish. And that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. One particularly difficult case involved an 80-year-old woman named Rose Peterson, whose son had been stealing her Social Security checks for months while telling her that the government had reduced her benefits. Rose was living on crackers and water, afraid to leave her apartment because her son had told her that if anyone discovered her financial problems, she'd be forced into a nursing home. Working with Rose reminded me of Sophia's plan to have me declared incompetent and move to assisted living. The difference was that Rose's son had succeeded where Sophia had failed, using his mother's trust and confusion to maintain control over her life and finances. "How did you know to fight back?" Rose asked me during one of our meetings. "How did you know you were strong enough?" "I didn't know," I told her honestly. "I just knew that the alternative was unacceptable. I'd worked too hard to build my life to let someone else destroy it, even if that someone was my own son." Rose eventually found the courage to report her son's theft and move into senior housing where she was safe from his manipulation. Watching her reclaim her independence at 80 years old was one of the most inspiring things I'd ever witnessed. The legal proceedings against Sophia moved forward with the grinding slowness of the federal justice system. Her attorney had approached Eleanor and me about testifying as character witnesses, hoping that our family connection might encourage leniency in sentencing. "Absolutely not," Eleanor had responded without hesitation. "Sophia had the opportunity to make things right with our families, and she chose to continue stealing from other people instead. She doesn't deserve our help now." I'd agreed with Eleanor's assessment. While I didn't take any pleasure in Sophia's legal troubles, I also couldn't ignore the fact that she'd learned nothing from our confrontation. If anything, our agreement had simply taught her to be more careful about her targets and more sophisticated in her methods. Danny had asked me to write a letter to the judge explaining the impact of Sophia's crimes on our family, hoping that a victim impact statement might help with her sentencing. But when I'd read the letter he'd drafted for my signature, I'd been appalled by its content. The letter portrayed Sophia as a loving mother and wife who'd made mistakes under pressure, asking for leniency so she could return to caring for her daughter. There was no acknowledgement of the systematic nature of her crimes, no recognition of the multiple victims she'd targeted, no acceptance of responsibility for the choices she'd made. "Danny, I can't sign this," I'd told him. "This letter makes it sound like Sophia's crimes were minor mistakes, rather than calculated predatory behavior." "Mom, she's the mother of your granddaughter. Don't you want Emma to have her mother in her life?" "I want Emma to have a mother who isn't a criminal," I'd replied. If Sophia had wanted to be present for her daughter's childhood, she should have thought about that before she decided to steal from her employer while already on probation for stealing from our family. Instead of signing Danny's letter, I'd written my own victim impact statement, describing the full scope of Sophia's crimes against our family and the pattern of predatory behavior that had become clear over time. I'd explained how her theft had affected not just my finances, but my ability to trust, my relationships with family members, and my sense of security in my own home. The statement wasn't written in anger or revenge, but as an honest accounting of the damage Sophia had caused and the ongoing impact of her choices. The judge needed to understand that this wasn't a case of someone who'd made a single mistake under pressure, but someone who'd systematically targeted vulnerable people over an extended period. When Sophia was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release and full restitution to all victims, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that she'd been held accountable for her crimes. Sadness for Emma, who would spend most of her childhood visiting her mother behind bars. And a grim satisfaction that the justice system had recognized the seriousness of financial predation against vulnerable populations. Danny had been devastated by the sentence, calling me in tears to ask if there was anything I could do to help with Sophia's appeal. "Mom, 8 years is too long. Emma will be in 4th grade when Sophia gets out. She won't even remember her mother." "Danny, that's the consequence of Sophia's choices," I'd said gently but firmly. She knew she was risking her freedom when she decided to steal from her employer, while already facing restitution for stealing from our family. "But what about Emma? What about our family?" "Emma will be fine. Children are resilient, and she has you to take care of her. As for our family, we're still figuring out what that looks like going forward." The truth was that my relationship with Danny remained complicated and fragile. He'd proven himself capable of betraying my trust in the most fundamental ways. And rebuilding that trust was a process that might take decades, if it was even possible. We maintained regular contact because of Emma, but our interactions were careful and superficial. Danny paid his restitution on time every month, attended the required counseling sessions, and submitted to financial monitoring without complaint. He was doing everything required by our agreement, but there was no warmth or spontaneity in our relationship anymore. Sometimes I grieved for the closeness we'd lost, for the easy affection and comfortable familiarity that had defined our relationship before I'd discovered his crimes. But I also recognized that our previous closeness had been built partly on my willingness to overlook warning signs and accept treatment that should have been unacceptable. The new boundaries in our relationship were healthier, even if they were less comfortable. I no longer felt obligated to rescue Danny from the consequences of his poor choices. I no longer assumed that family loyalty required me to sacrifice my own well-being for his benefit. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that this evolution in our relationship was actually a form of love, even if it didn't feel like traditional maternal love. You're loving your son by holding him accountable for his actions and refusing to enable his destructive behavior, she'd explained. You're also modeling for your granddaughter what healthy boundaries look like in relationships. The financial monitoring of Danny's accounts had revealed some concerning patterns that reinforced my decision to maintain strict boundaries. While he wasn't stealing anymore, he was still making impulsive financial decisions and struggling with money management in ways that suggested the underlying issues that had led to his crimes weren't fully resolved. He'd bought a car he couldn't afford, fallen behind on rent payments, and taken out payday loans at predatory interest rates to cover basic expenses. When I'd mentioned these observations during one of our conversations, he'd become defensive and angry. "I'm not stealing from anyone," he'd snapped. "I'm managing my own finances the best I can." "Danny, taking out loans at 30% interest to pay for groceries isn't managing your finances. It's setting yourself up for financial crisis. What do you want me to do?" "I'm paying you and Eleanor $1,500 a month in restitution, plus child support for Emma, plus my own living expenses. There's nothing left for emergencies." "Then maybe you need to consider getting a second job or finding ways to reduce your expenses instead of taking on high-interest debt." Easy for you to say. "You're living in my house rent-free while I'm struggling to survive." The bitterness in his voice was a reminder that Danny still viewed himself as the victim in our situation. Despite everything that had happened, despite the evidence of his crimes and the consequences he was facing, part of him still believed that I was being unfair by holding him accountable for stealing from me. That conversation had crystallized something important for me. Danny wasn't just someone who'd made bad choices under pressure. He was someone whose fundamental values and thinking patterns were disordered in ways that might never be fully corrected. The counseling he was attending focused on financial crime and addiction, but it couldn't change the core belief system that had allowed him to justify stealing from his own mother. He still believed that his needs and wants were more important than other people's rights. He still viewed my money as something he was entitled to access when he was struggling. Understanding this didn't make me love Danny less, but it did help me accept that our relationship would never return to what it had been before. The son I'd thought I'd raised, the man I'd believed him to be, had never really existed. The real Danny was someone who was capable of love and kindness, but also capable of betrayal and manipulation when it served his interests. Learning to love this version of my son while protecting myself from his capacity for harm was one of the most difficult challenges I'd ever faced. It required a kind of emotional compartmentalization that went against every maternal instinct I'd developed over 32 years of parenting. But it was also liberating in ways I hadn't expected. By accepting Danny as he really was instead of the idealized version I'd created in my mind, I was freed from the constant anxiety of trying to fix him or save him from himself. His choices were his responsibility, and their consequences belonged to him alone. This new perspective extended to my relationship with Emma as well. While I loved her deeply and wanted to be part of her life, I was no longer willing to sacrifice my own well-being or compromise my boundaries to maintain access to her. When Danny had suggested that I could reduce my restitution requirements in exchange for providing regular childcare, I declined without hesitation. "Danny, our financial agreement isn't negotiable. If you need childcare help, you'll need to find other solutions. But Mom, you love spending time with Emma, and I could really use the help." "I do love spending time with Emma, which is why I visit her regularly. But I'm not going to let you use my love for her to manipulate me into changing our agreement. The hurt in his eyes had been genuine, but so had my resolve. I'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't actually love at all. It was enabling disguised as affection. The changes in my life extended far beyond my relationship with Danny and Sophia. The experience of being victimized and then fighting back had fundamentally altered how I approached all my relationships and life choices. I'd become much more selective about the people I allowed into my inner circle, more aware of the signs of manipulation and exploitation that I'd previously dismissed or overlooked. I'd also become more assertive about my own needs and preferences, less willing to automatically defer to others or assume that their comfort was more important than mine. The book club had been my first test of these new relationship skills. When I'd rejoined the group, several members had peppered me with intrusive questions about my family troubles and offered unsolicited advice about forgiveness and reconciliation. The old Joe would have smiled politely and changed the subject, desperate to avoid conflict or disapproval. The new Joe addressed the behavior directly. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not comfortable discussing personal family matters in this setting, I'd said calmly but firmly. I'd prefer to keep our book discussions focused on literature rather than my private life. Some members had been taken aback by my directness, but most had respected my boundaries and moved on to discussing the novel we'd been assigned. The few who'd continued pushing for details had found themselves gently but consistently redirected until they'd given up or moved on to easier targets. The same approach had worked in other social settings. When acquaintances at church had asked probing questions about why Danny and Sophia had moved out of their house, I'd simply said that we'd decided different living arrangements worked better for everyone, and then changed the subject. When former colleagues had expressed surprise that I was living alone in such a large house, I'd explained that I enjoyed the space and could afford the upkeep, without feeling obligated to justify my choices or make others comfortable with my decisions. The financial independence I'd fought so hard to protect had given me the freedom to make choices based on my own preferences, rather than external pressure or expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't need anyone else's approval or support to live the way I wanted to live. That independence had opened up possibilities I'd never seriously considered before. When a position had opened up at Elder Justice Coalition for a part-time outreach coordinator, I'd applied and been hired based on my personal experience and volunteer work. The job involved traveling to senior centers and community organizations throughout the state, providing education about financial fraud and abuse prevention. It was meaningful work that utilized my professional skills while helping people protect themselves from the kind of victimization I'd experienced. More importantly, it was work I'd chosen because it interested and fulfilled me, not because I needed the income or felt obligated to help support someone else's goals. The paycheck was modest, but it represented something precious: the ability to pursue purpose rather than just survival. The travel required by the job had also rekindled my love of exploration and adventure. I'd spent so many years focused on stability and security that I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed experiencing new places and meeting different people. On weekends, when I wasn't visiting Emma, I'd started taking day trips to small towns and state parks within driving distance of home. I'd rediscovered my pleasure in hiking, photography, and the simple joy of being alone with my thoughts in beautiful natural settings. The solo travel had felt intimidating at first, especially after years of viewing myself primarily in relation to other people, as Danny's mother, as Tom's wife, as Sophia's helper. But gradually I'd remembered that I was interesting company for myself, that my own thoughts and observations were worth experiencing even if no one else was there to witness them. When the opportunity had arisen to attend a week-long training conference in Colorado, I'd extended my stay to explore Rocky Mountain National Park. Hiking alone through alpine meadows filled with wildflowers, I'd felt a sense of peace and completeness that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. That trip had been a turning point in understanding that solitude wasn't the same as loneliness, that independence wasn't the same as isolation. I could choose to be alone because I enjoyed my own company, not because I'd been abandoned or rejected by others. The confidence I'd gained from rebuilding my life had also changed how I handled the ongoing challenges related to Danny and Sophia's situation. When Danny had called in tears because Emma was asking difficult questions about why Mommy had to go away, I'd offered practical support without taking on emotional responsibility for fixing his problems. Danny, Emma is asking those questions because she's a smart child who knows something significant has changed in her life, I'd said. You need to find age-appropriate ways to explain the situation honestly, without making her feel responsible for adult problems. But I don't know what to say to her. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her mother is in prison? You might want to consider getting help from a child psychologist who specializes in family trauma. And there are books designed to help children understand when a parent is incarcerated. I can't afford a psychologist, and I don't want Emma thinking of her mother as a criminal. Danny, Sophia is a criminal. That's not a judgment. It's a legal fact. Protecting Emma from age-appropriate truth isn't going to help her in the long run. So you think I should just tell her that her mother is a thief? I think you should get professional guidance about how to help Emma process this situation in healthy ways. And I think you should focus on what you can control, being a good father, rather than trying to manage her perceptions of situations you can't change. The conversation had ended with Danny frustrated by my refusal to take over the problem and solve it for him. But I'd felt proud of my ability to offer appropriate support without getting drawn into drama that wasn't mine to manage. Similar situations had arisen repeatedly over the past year, each one offering me an opportunity to practice maintaining boundaries while still caring about the people involved. When Sophia had called collect from prison asking me to add money to her commissary account, I'd declined politely but firmly. When Danny had asked me to co-sign a lease for a better apartment, explaining that Emma deserved a nicer place to live, I'd suggested he work with a credit counselor to improve his financial situation instead. When Eleanor had wondered if we should visit Sophia in prison to show support for Emma's sake, I'd explained that my presence would send a message that Sophia's crimes were forgivable, which wasn't consistent with my values or our agreement. Each of these decisions had felt difficult in the moment, but each had also reinforced my growing understanding that healthy relationships required clear boundaries and consistent follow-through. Love didn't mean saying yes to every request, or taking responsibility for other people's emotional comfort. The year anniversary of discovering Sophia's bank statement had prompted me to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed, not just in practical terms, but in fundamental ways. I was living in a different house, pursuing different work, maintaining different relationships, and operating from a completely different understanding of my own worth and capabilities. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. I'd stopped waiting for permission to live my life on my own terms. For too many years, I'd made decisions based on what other people needed or wanted from me, assuming that my role was to support everyone else's dreams while putting my own on hold. Now I understood that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was essential. I couldn't give anyone else what they needed if I wasn't strong and healthy and financially secure myself. And more importantly, I deserved to live a life that fulfilled and satisfied me, regardless of whether that life met other people's expectations or needs. The house on Magnolia Avenue had become a symbol of this transformation. What had started as a monument to my victimization had evolved into a testament to my strength and resilience. Every room held memories of the woman I'd been and evidence of the woman I'd become. The kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals for people who were stealing from me now hosted dinner parties for friends who valued and respected me. The bathroom where I'd scrubbed toilets while they forged my signature now contained luxurious soaps and candles that reminded me daily that I deserved beautiful things. The guest room where I'd slept like a prisoner in my own family's house had been transformed into a creative space where I pursued hobbies and interests that brought me joy. The office where I'd discovered evidence of their crimes had become a command center where I managed my finances and planned my future with confidence and expertise. Most importantly, the master bedroom that I'd never been invited to occupy while living as their servant had become my sanctuary, a space that was entirely mine and entirely chosen. As I sat in my garden on that September morning, reading the letter about Sophia's arrest and sentencing, I realized that I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with my life as it was. Not happiness dependent on other people's choices or behavior, but deep satisfaction with the life I'd built for myself. There were still challenges ahead. Emma would continue growing up with complicated family dynamics. Danny would continue struggling with the consequences of his choices. Sophia would eventually be released from prison and attempt to rebuild her life. But those challenges belonged to them, not to me. My job was to continue living my life with integrity and purpose, to maintain appropriate boundaries while offering appropriate support, and to remember that I was not responsible for fixing other people's problems or managing their emotions. The woman who'd cleaned their toilets while they robbed her blind was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable. A woman who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect and treatment she deserved. And that woman had won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.